Day 17. It's been 2 days since we first saw the creature. We've seen them wander past the house a time or two since, and hidden each time that we noticed them. We've had no new contact with our neighbors, and as our food continues to get low, we've decided that I'm going to cross our backyard and either talk to our neighbor or search their house for supplies. After what seemed like hours, yet only being about a minute or two of staring out into the fog from the backyard, not just looking and waiting for movement, any noise, nothing came, signaling that it was safe, that is as safe as it could be for me to venture out into the fog. My journey wasn't going to be very far. Out the door, down the back porch steps, maybe 30 yards to our privacy fence, then another 20 yards, maybe to get to my neighbor's porch and back door. It was the best route that I could think of, the one that had the most cover as well as the shortest distance. Holding a dowel rod in my hand with the biggest kitchen knife taped to the end as my only form of protection, I turned the knob. As quietly as I could, I started my trip for supplies. Crouching and moving swiftly, I made it to the fence, and as I began to climb the fence, all I could think was, I really wish I had installed a much sturdier fence. I dropped down to the other side clumsily with a thud, not quite the agile ninja I once was in my early 20s. Kids, busy schedules, general apathy had taken its toll on my body as I made my way into my early 30s. Crouched next to my neighbor's back door, whisper yelling, trying to avoid knocking for fear of making too much noise. Eric, you in there? No answer. Hey, if you don't answer me, I'm coming in. Eric, you home? Still no answer. Becoming very impatient with good reason, knowing those things were still lurking about, I slowly turned the knob. Locked. Shit, I exclaimed under my breath. Not wanting to break any glass or try to kick the door in for fear of causing too much noise, suddenly I remembered that they had a door leading directly down into their basement so they could access the pool pump and filters. The only way I knew this was the fact that Grace and I had looked at the house when it was still on the market, along with quite a few other houses in town, before we found ours and finally made our decision. I crept down off the porch and quietly over to the basement door and tried the handle. The knob turned, and the door swung open and into the house. Success. Not sure why, but at that moment, instead of going into the house, I left the door cracked open and decided to check the garage first. I snuck over to the garage door, and to my surprise, the door was unlocked as well. I walked in to find a pretty typical garage, various lawn equipment all stored in specific spots to make sure enough room is left to park one of the two vehicles inside. I searched the benches and cabinets looking for anything that might be useful. I kind of expected to find a freezer full of extra food, similar to what my dad has. There was nothing. But there was no freezer. Sadly, there also wasn't much useful I could find while I was in there. I did, however, find an adult compound bow and camo case. That's all well and good, but still useless unless I can find... Yes! I thought and exclaimed mid-thought as my eyes spotted a small bundle of about 10 arrows sitting in a case over in the corner of the garage. I walked over and pulled one out. No tip. Shit, I said, disappointed. I decided to grab them all anyway. Worst case, I could just sharpen the ends as they were. As I moved the case of arrows and slung it over my shoulder behind it, I saw a small metal box. I opened it. Oh, yes! The box had large, razor blade broadheads for deer hunting in it. Now I had some form of projectile weapon to protect my family. I gathered my newfound treasures and I walked back out of my neighbor's garage, dropped the bag with arrows, heads, and the bow over the fence in our backyard. I crept back to the basement door and it let out a soft whine as I opened it and walked down the steps into the basement. As I got to the bottom of the steps, I heard an odd clicking, somewhat sporadic. I thought it may be the house itself creaking. Still holding my makeshift spear in my backpack I was planning on using to haul whatever food I could find back to our house. Luckily, even though I couldn't find any freezer in the garage, I did find one in the basement. I walked over and pulled up the lid. It was about half full, but he was more than enough to get us past a few more weeks if needed as far as meat goes. I loaded a good amount of it into the backpack, and I left the rest thinking I could come back later if I needed. The power was still working perfectly as I saw no problem leaving the rest of the meat safely in the working freezer. I thought I should check the rest of the house for more non-perishables and possibly some evidence that my neighbors had been out of town during the beginning of all this. As I walked to the steps and up to the first floor, I noticed two very unsettling things. The first being an all too familiar scent of rotting meat. I really hope they just left burgers on the table and they let them go bad, I thought to myself, knowing deep down that there was no possible way that was truly the case. The other thing was I noticed that some of the fog seemed to be inside the house. It hadn't been so obvious being in the basement, but as I got to the steps of the first floor, it became more obvious. I climbed the steps cautiously and quietly, slowly moved around the house until I found the pantry. I filled the rest of my bag with as many useful cans of food as I could. The bag getting heavy, I was ready to leave when I heard it. Something moving upstairs. Shit. They must be home. Why didn't they answer me? I thought, setting my bag by the basement steps and moving to the front of the house, still with my knife on a stick. As I got to the living room, I realized something was very off. See, the big picture window in the living room had been smashed. Glass lay all over the hardwood floor, meaning that something had broken in instead of out. This is the reason all the fog had been able to pour into the house. As I made my way past the glass to the steps leading upstairs, the smell kept increasing, becoming more and more nauseating. I crept up the steps, my blade leading the way. Doorways on either side of the narrow hall met me as I reached the top of the steps. I moved slowly, as to be as silent as I could, as I made my way down the hall. First bedroom door. Empty. Typical child's bedroom. Room across the hall. Again empty. Home office. But they've been turned upside down. Destroyed. Further down the hall I moved. Third room. I froze. It was a bathroom. Laying on the floor lay Eric's wife, looking like she'd been dead for days. Hovering above her was one of those creatures, doing what looked like sniffing at the body using the slits in the front of its face, and suddenly its pure white eyes split vertically in the middle and separated as they were eyelids from some reptile, revealing holes in its face where before I had merely assumed that they were its eyes simply based on where they had been located on its head. From those holes came two praying mantis-like arms, rearing back towards its horns and plunging into the dead body lying beneath the creature. It made its clicking noises again as it fed on the corpse. The protrusions from the front of its face must have been hollow because it looked like the creature was drinking her insides, using them like demonic flesh straws. I began to step away. And I saw the creature open its gills on its ribs and release more of that purple fog into the air. Then the floorboards creaked. The creature ripped its flesh straws out of the corpse and turned its head to me. My eyes widened, and the only thoughts screaming through my skull were, oh, shit. The creature let out its piercing screech, causing my ears to hurt, my bones to vibrate. It lunged at me, dark talons flying towards my face. I fell backwards, rising the makeshift spear up as I fell, and the creature's talons ripped into my shoulders, both front and back, as its weird hand clasped across my arm. The blades of my spear stabbed into the creature's chest, but it didn't plunge very deep before the tape tore and I was just left holding a dowel rod. Pinned to the ground by the creature, it moved its head closer to mine and struck at me with those needles coming from its eyes. They made a thud and splinters flew up as I just had enough movement to dodge, and it made contact with the floor beneath my head. It clicked at me ominously as it reared up for another strike. The creature surprisingly wasn't very heavy, so I took the split second as it reached up to move my arm and throw it back away from me. As I threw it, it tried to strike again, hitting nothing but air as it flew back. The claws ripped away from my shoulder as it flew through the air. It landed back on its hands and feet and immediately jumped at me again. As it came at me, I lifted my legs, making contact with its chest. It came down on my foot, bending my legs almost as if adding pressure to a spring. Just before I went to kick it away, I reached up and grasped the handle of the knife, still half embedded in its chest. I kicked the beast away and off to the side, trying to aim it into a room, hoping to close the door behind it and run. As I kicked it away from me, my hand on the knife, it pulled free from the beast's chest. It almost made it through the door that I had tried for, but before it hit sideways and dropped to the floor, just on its side of the door frame. I had just enough time to scramble to my feet as it did the same and immediately lunged at my face again. I ducked just in time, slamming the knife into its ribs, just about where its gills were. This time, I buried the knife all the way in and the creature shuddered and let out an excruciating screech, letting me know that I had heard it. I didn't leave the knife in this time. I backed away from it and I pulled the knife with me. After I truly heard it, it seemed to slow down its attacks, becoming more methodic. With my other hand, I grabbed the dowel rod up off the floor, now having a knife and a club. I felt like I might be able to win this fight. My shoulder burned with pain from its talons having ripped through my flesh. I swung the club at it, and it backed up for a split second, lunging at me as I finished my swing. I stepped and pressed myself against the wall of the hallway and attempted to dodge, which worked for the most part, except I still caught a talon in my hip. I spun around and swung the knife blindly, luckily making contact and chopping off one of the face needles and half of the other all in one swing. This clearly did some major damage to it, because without those, it seemed to lose any form of coordination. It began stumbling and tripping over its own feet. Its attacks became very sorry attempts. This made it very easy for me to lunge in and drive that knife directly into the slits in its head. As the knife drove into the creature, it almost instantly went limp. As it lay on the ground, finally lifeless, its gills opened again and released a large amount of that purple fog into the air. As I saw this, I quickly made my way back downstairs. I grabbed my bag, I went down to the basement past the freezer, I went out the back door, I hurried, putting all caution about being quiet aside, tossing the bag over the fence as well as the dowel rod and knife. I moved a few feet down the fence before I climbed over, because if I fell, I really didn't want to fall on the knife. I was already in enough pain to add to it. I grabbed all the bags. My shoulder and hip, they were hurting, especially with all the extra weight. I carried it all back to the door where Grace was waiting for me and opened the door as I got close. As I came through the door, I dropped the bags and I embraced my wife in a hug, letting her know that shit has been crazy, but I'd be okay. And then I love her very much. And then I collapsed on the kitchen floor, exhausted. Grace moved all the bags, and she did her best to drag my passed-out body into the bathroom. Stripped me down, laid me flat on the floor while I remained passed out. She cleaned, sterilized my wounds, grabbed first aid kits from around the house, small sewing kit and with needle and thread, and limited knowledge of how to make medical stitches. She used her phone to play a few tutorial videos on YouTube, followed along, and sewed me up as best she could. She then wrapped bandages and gauze over her work, made me comfortable, and let me sleep. I woke up in pain around midnight, forced myself to get up off the floor, looked in the mirror and the medical treatment I received. Took some ibuprofen, I made my way upstairs to the bed where my family was. I woke Grace as I walked in the room. I kissed her. I told her thank you. I laid down next to her. And I fell back into a deep sleep. Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and thank you so much for listening to tonight's story, whether it be an episode of something, or tonight's podcast, or tonight's YouTube. I hope all of you are staying safe in the current pandemic craziness. If you guys are missing out on some of the artwork from some of your favorite artists, you can always check out the description down below, where I'm linking over some of my friends who are not able to do conventions, seeing as all the conventions this year have currently been shut down. So if you're missing out on some of the incredible artwork you can normally get from them, a group of my friends, or a lot of different friends of mine, are all found in the description down below. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons, and you can always join them at patreon.com/Mrcreepypasta. People like Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Chompski, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sindee Barney, G Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen VanHuss, Chance Burnett, Tristain Pelton, Nico, TheGingerBroz, Dante Rowe, Raphael Rodriguez, Lastbladesong, Eliminator 86, Nebsky, SteampunkSinner, Kaleb Dougal, Daniel Poulsen, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Bobby Carmen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Barbara Macedo, Thomas Burgett, Azazel Rotten, Let's Get Scared, S-Man, Andrew Kirisuba Warnock, Bad Honey, Creepypasta Adam, Someone You Love, Brennan Wright, Said the King 56, and Somber Puppet. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, to all of you on Patreon, you guys that are down there in the description, and everyone else. And thank you all for listening and watching and being subscribed. Sweet dreams.